Rambam, welcome. We continue in the Rambam's teachings, the laws which finish up the book of acquisitions. And acquisitions is the difficulty. Well, there's a difficult one that is hard to appreciate with the modern mind. But
What's that mean?
let me speak. Well,
I apologize.
okay. And with laws of avadim, slaves, servitude, that is difficult for people to appreciate and to understand. But when we understand what the Torah is speaking about, we see, wow, it's actually quite a blessing. Um, Quite a blessing, even though the modern mind, has a challenge and difficulty with it. But we'll see the laws. Let's get right into it. Okay, there we are.
Look more interesting.
Hilchos Avadim. This is the last part of this 12th book. We have two more books to finish off the Rambam once again, which is pretty amazing. Okay, they contain 13 mitzvahs, 5 positive and 8 negative. They are the laws governing the acquisition of a Hebrew servant, not to sell in the manner of servants are usually sold, not to make him performing excruciating labor, not to make him perform servile tasks, not to make him a resident alien, to make him perform excruciating labor, to grant a Hebrew servant the severance gift when he attains freedom, not to let him go empty-handed, to redeem the Hebrew maidservant, to designate her as a wife, not to sell him a second time. The Canadian and servant forever, unless the master causes him to one of the primary limbs to fall, not to return the master to his master or servant who fled from the diaspora to Eretz Yisrael, not to oppress a servant who has fled to us. These mitzvahs are explained in the following chapters. Okay, chapter 1. The term Hebrew slave, Eved Ivri, its use in Torah refers to a Jew whom the court sells by compulsion, or a person who sells himself willingly. Okay, so it's either the court, right, has sold you, or you sold yourself willingly. So it's not slave labor, right? That kind of thing of, let me capture this guy and, I'll make him into my slave. That's not what it is, right? A Hebrew slave. When a person steals and does not have the resources to repay the principal, the court sells him, as we've explained in Hilchos Geneva. No other Jewish person is sold by the court except a thief, right? So someone who committed murder isn't sold. Someone who does other bad things, they're not sold into slavery. It's only a thief, right? Who can't pay back, right? He stole and he doesn't have the means to pay back. So in order to pay back who he stole from, he's sold into slavery. That money is given to that person and he has to work, right? So, and it's based on the verse. The verse says, when you acquire a Hebrew servant, and concerning the person, it says, when the Jewish brother will be sold to you. What does it mean? The term person who sells himself, what does that refer to? So I don't see from how it says from the acquire a Hebrew servant that it's speaking about theft. I don't see how you see it from the verse exactly.
What, initially, or we're talking about now?
No, the verse remember, it's not based on logic. It's based what the Torah says.
On hindsight, not what we're doing right now. Okay.
No, we're learning right now.
Really?
There's a verse in Exodus when you acquire a Hebrew servant, right?
Mhm.
So how did we know from there that it was speaking about theft? Maybe why not other things? I don't see how you know that from the verse. That's all I'm saying. Okay. Now, concerning a person, also says in the verse, when your Jewish brother will be sold to you. So, what does the term, maybe he's going to explain, term, a person who sells himself refer? When a Jew becomes sold, sorely impoverished, the Torah gives him the permission to sell himself. So, the person selling himself when he's completely impoverished as a servant, as it says, when your brother will become impoverished and be sold to you.
Not different.
No. There's two different instances.
Yeah.
One is a thief, and that's coming from the verse in Exodus, and then there's from the Leviticus and from Deuteronomy. But those are two separate instances. Okay. So when your brother will become impoverished and be sold to you. A person is not allowed to sell himself as a servant and stash away the money, use it to buy merchandise or utensils, or to give it to his creditor. He may sell himself only when he needs the money for his very livelihood. A person is not permitted to sell himself unless he has no property remaining at all. Even his clothing no longer remains his. Only in such a situation may he sell himself. He doesn't own his shirt. He doesn't own his shirt. Got it? That's the only time he can sell himself. Any other time he's not allowed. And the other instance is again, what's the other instance? Theft. Only theft. And that the court sells him, not himself. Number two, we've already explained that a woman is never sold because of theft. Similarly, she may not sell herself as a servant, nor may she purchase a Hebrew servant or a Canaanite servant, slave, because of suspicion of immoral behavior. A convert may not be purchased as a Hebrew servant. This is derived from the verse, and he shall return to his family. It's speaking about someone who has family within the Jewish faith. So a convert cannot be purchased then because he doesn't have a family. Because he's considered like a child that's been like renewed, right? His non-Jewish family is not, halachically his family that the law would consider that he's going back to. A Hebrew servant who is sold by the court is sold only to a native Israelite or to a convert to Judaism. Right? In other words, you can't sell him to a non-Jew. Similarly, a person who sells himself as a servant is not permitted to sell himself to a non-Jew, not even to a resident alien. Right? So, to a non-Jew, resident alien means someone who has taken upon themselves the 7 Noahide laws, as opposed to a non-Jew who hasn't. If he transgresses himself even to a non-Jew, even the service of false deity itself, the sale is binding. So if he does sell himself, the sale is binding to a non-Jew, right? And even to someone who's idolatrous, as indicated by the verse, which speaks of the person selling himself, to which he must be uprooted from the sojourner's family. What must be uprooted refers to a false deity.
But in that case, the person to whom it was sold do not necessarily have to follow the laws.
He does have to. That's why he shouldn't be sold to a non-Jew, because you still have to keep Shabbos. You still have to keep kosher. So that's why you shouldn't sell yourself to a non-Jew. Right? You're going to put yourself into a predicament. Even though you did it, it's still binding sale. If a person says, I am going to sell myself to a non-Jew, you're not obligated to do anything for him until he actually sells himself. Once he sells himself to a non-Jew, however, although he transgressed and acted improperly, it is a mitzvah to redeem him, so that he does not assimilate among them. After he is sold, redemption should be granted him. So it's interesting. You're not obligated to do something before, but once he does, you're obligated to redeem him, to buy him back. Otherwise, he's going to assimilate and live a non-Jewish life. Neither a person who sells himself nor the one who is sold by the court should be sold in public on an auction block, nor in an alley as slaves are sold. He shall not be sold as a slave is sold, because that's what the verse says. Instead, he should be sold in private and honorable manner. It is forbidden to make any Hebrew servant perform excruciating labor. What is excruciating labor? Labor that has no limit, or labor that is unnecessary, and is asked of the servant with the intent to give him work so that he will not remain idle. Based on the above, our sages said that a master should not tell the Hebrew servant, "Hoe under the vines until I come," for he has not placed a limit for the work asked of him. Instead, he should tell him, "Hoe until this and this time," or until you reach this and this place, right? So you're not making it unlimited, because that would be excruciating labor. When a person doesn't know, right, when they're getting out, like, there was some people sitting here and they're feeling they're never getting out of here. So sitting here was excruciating for them because they didn't know when that's why some people, when they come to daven, to pray, they say, well, when's it over? Because otherwise it might be every minute might be like an hour of excruciating pain. You see, we're all slaves. All right. Similarly, you should not tell him dig in this place if he has no need for the activity. Even telling him to warm a drink for him or to cool one off for him, if he does not need it, it is forbidden and reflects the violation of a negative commandment, as verses do not impose excruciating labor upon him. Okay? Thus, a Hebrew servant may be compelled to perform only limited and necessary tasks. Similarly, if a Hebrew servant is sold to a non-Jew who imposes excruciating labor upon him, the Jews are commanded to prevent him from doing so. If they allow him to continue, they transgress a negative commandment, as it says, you should not impose excruciating pain upon him before your eyes. As before, not the non-Jew who's at fault, right? Because he comes from a world of slavery that is not like this, right? He comes from a world that slavery is permitted, that you can enslave. That was back in the day, right? You're allowed to do these things. But the Jew is responsible. Don't allow that to happen to your fellow Jew who is now owned by a non-Jew. Wow. We are not, however, required to enter in non-Jew's domain and check to see that he is not imposing excruciating labor upon him. This is implied by the term "before your eyes," when you see. Others, when you see, when you know, when you're aware, that's before you. But you don't have to go checking up on the non-Jew to see if that's the case. Wow, fascinating. Whenever a Jew purchases a Hebrew servant, he may not make him perform the basing tasks that are regulated only to servants. In other words, and to have him carry his clothes to the bathhouse or remove his shoes. Do not have him perform servile tasks. Instead, he should treat him as a hired laborer, because then he shall be like a hired laborer or resident among you. If, however, it is permitted for the servant to cut the master's hair, launder his clothes, and bake his dough, he may not, however, make him the manager of a public bathhouse, a public barber, or public baker. However, this was his profession before he was sold, it's permitted, right? Because then it's not an embarrassing task that you're doing, right? Indeed, at the outset, he should not teach him any profession at all. Instead, he should work at the profession at which he worked previously. So what is implied? The Hebrew servant, for his self-image, is depressed because he is being sold. When, however, a Jew is not been sold, he may be hired to perform servile tasks. For he's performing this work out of his own desire and own consent. So can you have someone carry your clothes to the bathhouse? Yes, if you hire him for that. He took that hire, right? So therefore, he took that hire, right? So then you can have someone do that for you. But the servant who was purchased, you're not allowed to do that because he's not consenting to it. Wow, fascinating.
That makes them depressed.
Yeah, make him depressed. Oh, let's see. Okay, we just got a few more here. Oh, amazing stuff. Could you imagine that these laws existed in a time when slavery, like 3,000 years ago, right? Slavery was just the most common thing, right? Right? Because what was back in the day? Nation conquering nation, right? And when you conquered the nation, they became your slaves,
And you treat them
right?
where you want to.
And you treat them any way you want to, right? I know, I'm wondering if there was a code at all by any of humanity, of any of the nations, that had some kind of code on how you're supposed to treat your slaves. Somehow, I doubt it. Just like shows us how, the word of God is like, and look what's being said here, unreal.
I have an expression, if you have only one bed, the servant sleeps in.
I think we're gonna get there. Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, I see. Okay, number 8. When people do not conduct themselves in an appropriate manner, it is permissible to impose one's authority over them to force and subjugate them. When a king decrees that anyone who does not pay the fixed head tax should be enslaved to the person who pays the head tax for him, the person who pays the head tax for someone may not use that person for labor beyond the ordinary measure. He may not, however, use him as a Canaanite slave. If, however, the person does not conduct himself properly, he may use him as a slave. Right. So back in the day, there was a king who would, if you didn't pay the head tax, and someone paid the head tax for you, and the king said you could use that person as your slave because you kind of bought him, because you paid for him,
Okay.
right?
Everything's fine.
But even that person you can't use beyond ordinary measure. A master obligated to treat him a slave or a maidservant as his equal with regard to food and drink, clothing and living quarters is implied, for it is good for him with you. Right? The master should not eat bread made out of fine flour, while the servant eats bread from coarse flour. The master should not drink aged wine while the servant drinks fresh wine. The master should not sleep on cushions while the servant sleeps on straw. Nor should the master live in a walled city while the servant lives in a village, or the master live in a village while the servant lives in a walled city, as implied, and he shall live with you. Not leave with you, live with you. That's oh no, Yatsa imach. No, I'm saying leave with you. On this basis, our sages said, whoever purchases a Hebrew servant purchases a master for himself. Right. A master must treat his servant with brotherly love, as implied with regard to your brothers and children of Israel. Nevertheless, the servant himself must conduct himself as a servant with regard to those tasks that he must perform. The institution of a Hebrew maidservant and that of a Hebrew servant is not practiced except in the time of the Jubilee year was observed. This applies both to a Hebrew servant who sells himself and one who is sold by the court. We have already explained when the observance of Jubilee was nullified. It was nullified sometime in the first Holy Temple. Yeah, I think it was the first Holy Temple, if I recall correctly. It doesn't apply today, even though we see from here there would be some kind of compassion when you think about it. Homeless people, right?
Wow.
Think about homeless people. The homeless situation would be done with. Even again, we can't do these laws today, but
I love the line.
You know,
Whoever
something.
purchases you a servant purchases a master for himself.
yeah,
Beautiful line.
unbelievable. Yeah. All right, folks. Thank you.
Thank
Wait,
you.
uh,
Thank you, Rabbi.
later.